if you build products and services that delight your customers, if you even do that once or twice a year, you'll find that over time, your customer base doesn't just use your product. They don't just like your product. They'll love it irrationally. And one thing I'll tell you is one thing competitors hate is they hate competing with a product and service where the customers love it irrationally. I mean, this is why people hate competing with Apple at times, because they say, wait, I have another product that is faster, quicker, better, lower price. And people hate, they're like, why are people choosing the Apple product? It's because the Apple product is more than just the product itself. It's people feeling like that when they go with that product, they will get that feeling that they will get some of that magic, even though Apple doesn't deliver it all the time. They don't.
Hey everyone, this is Prashant and I'll be your host for the VC 10X podcast, and today we have Adam Nash with us. Adam is the former CEO of Wealthfront and current founder and CEO of Daffy. Prior to Wealthfront and Daffy, Adam has a strong operational experience holding executive positions at companies like LinkedIn, eBay, Dropbox, and Apple. Adam is also an angel investor in Firebase, Opendoor, Figma, and Gusto. To top it all off, Adam is an adjunct professor at Stanford University, where he teaches a class on personal finance. This episode is divided into two halves, the first half focusing on Adam's insights on angel investing in some highly successful companies, while the second half is focused on Adam's journey as a founder and insights on how to build a world-class product. We also talk about his investments into Figma, key metrics to track for early-stage startups, how to create customer delight, and lessons from his stint at companies like eBay, Dropbox, LinkedIn, and Apple. This episode is a wealth of wisdom for all founders on how to build highly successful companies. So without wasting any time, let's dive straight in. This episode is sponsored by my own podcasting agency called Podcast 10X, where I help VCs start and run their own podcast. While I was running VC 10X, this podcast that you're listening to right now, I asked my VC guests, why don't you start your own podcast? I mean, it's the best form of marketing for VCs. As they say, VC is a people play more than even a capital play. A podcast enables you to put your people at the front, your portfolio founders, your partners, and co-investors. It's a great way to build a brand and win competitive deals. It activates all your marketing channels in a single shot, be it YouTube or blog post or newsletter or social media. Everything gets activated in a single shot. And I get the same response from all the VCs that it's a lot of work and we don't have the time for it. I said, all right, let me handle the work for you, from pre-recording, editing, publishing to making social media clips. All you have to do is show up on a call, hit record, do the recording using the well-researched outline we provide you with, and you're done. We handle everything else. You know what they said? All right, let's give it a shot. So if you are a VC and want to up your marketing and branding game, I'd love to work with you. And if you're thinking there are too many VC podcasts already, remember there are way more VC firms out there. And if you're not standing out, you're losing out. So if you want to work with me on starting your podcast, go to podcast10x.com and book a call today. I'll add the link in the description and show notes below. Look forward to working with you. Hey, Adam, so good to have you on the VC 10X podcast. How are you doing?
Good. Good to be here.
Yeah, absolute pleasure having you on. And you're someone who has been investing over the years and is also a founder. So first we'll try to learn more about your investing journey, and then we'll flip over to the founder side of things, right? And before that, let's first have your background story, who you are as a person.
Oh, well, I'm happy to talk about that. I don't know how exciting it is. I'm one of the few people who actually grew up in Silicon Valley. My parents are both doctors. I was actually born in Stanford Hospital. I'm always a little sheepish about this because in Silicon Valley, one of the great things about Silicon Valley is almost no one is from Silicon Valley. Everyone comes in to build technology and companies, etc. But I've been here my whole life. Like a lot of folks, studied computer science and engineering in school. Had a focus on human-computer interaction. I've always been fascinated with how people interact with technology, their emotions, their impressions, what makes a great product. But I've had a long career here. I've been through four cycles of downturns and recoveries. I was president of CEO of Wealthfront. A lot of people know me from there, but I've held executive and technical roles at Dropbox, LinkedIn, eBay, Apple. I also teach at Stanford, where I'm an adjunct lecturer. I teach personal finance for engineers. And as an angel investor, I've been investing now for more than a dozen years, and I'm in over 100 companies. In the early days, I think some of my early wins were investing in companies like Firebase and Opendoor, Gusto, Figma, a lot of well-known names now, that took, a decade or more to build. But yeah, I try to stay active. And like I said, academically, I have a bachelor's and master's in computer science from Stanford and an MBA from Harvard.
Yeah. That's a very decorated story for anyone, right? And rightly so, well deserved. Uh, and when did you first start investing? When was the first time you got that first deal done?
That's a great question. I mean, in some ways, I started learning about investing before I was an angel investor, right? Out of business school, my first job out of school was being an associate at a venture capital firm. So I got to see how a firm that had been around for decades managed a couple $1 billion, actually thought about their investment process and work with some great investors there. But I really didn't start angel investing until after LinkedIn. I think, like a lot of people, very focused on building companies, my career, my discipline, etc. But when LinkedIn went public, I found myself in a place where Web 2.0 was hot, social was hot. LinkedIn was actually one of the first companies of that generation to go public. We were very proud of that fact in 2011. And so after that, I had already been working with a lot of founders because I ran the LinkedIn platform, the developer platform, et cetera. And I got to know and even led an acquisition or two while I was at LinkedIn. And so I was already working with founders, talking to founders a lot, advising companies. And so it was very natural for me to then start investing and putting myself out there. I had to come up with a model for myself. I do care a lot about personal finance and I do have a lot of responsibilities, family and otherwise. So I wanted to be prudent about it. But yeah, I really started in 2012.
Yeah, absolutely. And your strong experience as an operator at companies like eBay and LinkedIn, right? Dropbox, all these big names, right? Uh, does that help you get in front of the best deals and win those deals?
I think so. I mean, first of all, I would say that being an angel investor is very different than being a fund. When you're trying to write a large check into a company, I know it sounds funny, but the best companies you can only take a lead, right? There's only so many of those larger investments. As an angel, your check rarely is big enough that it messes up the round. So it's more about whether the founder finds it useful and valuable to have you on. And I think from that perspective, I think operators always have a big advantage if you've worked on not just worked for companies, but worked on problems that the founder finds relevant, right? Experience, right? If you're building a business that's focused on marketplaces, well, actually someone who has experience from eBay, et cetera, may be very useful. Or, if you care a lot about social, you care about growth, the person who ran core product at LinkedIn might be a valuable person to have around. Clearly in fintech, I get a lot of attention, right? I have my current company, Daffy. I was the president and CEO of Wealthfront. I was on the board of Acorns. So that's a lot of experience that founders find valuable. But I think it just depends on the founder. I think the biggest thing about being an operator and being out there and building in public is just the idea that actually a lot of investors want to help founders, right? And so a lot of the great investments that I've been able to make, some of them come from personal relationships of people I've worked with, but a lot of the best ones come from referral from other investors. When that founder asks a question, hey, I would love to have more experience, especially operating product experience around the table as I'm building the company. Do you know anyone? I've been fortunate enough that a lot of people tend to refer those founders to me.
Yeah, that's amazing. And let's talk about a specific deal that you did, right? Figma is one big name in your portfolio, right? So how did you get to meet those founders and did that deal with them?
Oh, Figma is a really atypical story. Aren't they all when they're so immensely successful? It's never the same story twice. But Figma is a
Totally.
funny story because Dylan Field, I actually knew from LinkedIn. He was an intern. So first, rule number one, everyone should know: always be nice to the interns. Take care of them. You never know. I was a VP at LinkedIn, right? I'm running core product. But Dylan and I always got along. He was very into innovation in school, energetic, very smart, obviously. And so I think after he was an intern at LinkedIn, when he ended up, he had another internship at another company called Flipboard, which was in Palo Alto, and I knew the founders there. But we had kept in touch. And so when he was starting Figma, he reached out for some advice. And I remember walking around downtown Palo Alto. Wealthfront was located in downtown Palo Alto at that time. And we just walked around talking about his idea. And I have to admit, there's a pattern with founders when I get excited about things. I tend to think of myself as a student of technology and history and have a pretty good beat on things. So whenever I meet a founder who says something that initially I don't agree with, and then I can't think of why, I pay attention, right? There's and so Dylan, I had a thesis in general that we were seeing with social and mobile a move online of applications kind of in the same way they moved online in the PC era, that we were redoing everything. We're going to start with productivity software. Then we were going to move to desktop publishing and image and design. And then, of course, to personal finance, kind of the way it played out in the 80s across the personal computer. And I was convinced that collaboration in the cloud and also cloud-based computing was enough of a change that it would catalyze that kind of trend. But I didn't think we were ready yet. To me, in my mind, graphic design was very compute intensive. It was going to be one of the last things that moved to the cloud, right? And Dylan said, no. Actually, it's the opposite. Actually, compute, the scalability, image processing, et cetera, parallelizes extremely well. Most of those computers sit idle on the desktop forever. You don't need that designer having that beefy machine. Like having the cloud, it can be shared. It'll be better cost effective. You do collaboration. And as he was talking about it, I realized he was right. Because latency had gone down and bandwidth had gone up, all you had to do is send the bits down. Actually, maybe we were ready. I mean, this is 2013, so it didn't seem so obvious. But I thought highly enough of Dylan and et cetera that, I told him I'd be happy to support and put a little bit of money into the seed round. And obviously that worked out well. Now, the initial product Dylan had, of course, changed a lot into what we now think of as Figma. But it's been really an incredible lesson for me watching him and his team build out that product and that company over the last decade. It's just been phenomenal.
Absolutely. And are you still invested or have you exited?
Oh, no. I'm still active investor.
Yeah.
I think, listen, I'm biased, obviously, but
Right.
I think Figma has the opportunity to really be a phenomenal, almost generational company and platform at scale.
Right.
The way they move, the level of innovation, the way they think about things, and that business is just continues to grow. So I'm gonna stay an investor for a while. I think for a long while.
Yeah. And I'm sure it's going to pay off. Good. Right. And what's your take on the recent proposed merger with Adobe that didn't end up materializing?
Well, this is a funny story. I mean, obviously, I'm not an insider. One of the things is an angel. Like, I'm not on the board, right? I don't have direct, knowledge of anything. So, like everyone, I'm watching this from the outside and hearing different things, trying to figure out what's going on. I mean, on the one hand, the truth is, I was excited for the team. It would have been a great outcome. I think the combination could have been very valuable, and I trust Dylan's judgment. So, Dylan wanted to do it, very supportive. But let's be honest, Figma, has an incredible future ahead of it as an independent company. And there's a lot of advantages being an independent company in both speed, prioritization, operations. So I think Figma is going to be great without the transaction. At the same time, it is really frustrating to be in an environment where these things aren't very predictable. It's unclear where the rules are. And to watch that whole process unfold, just the length of time and the lack of clarity and the complexity, et cetera, was really frustrating to watch. I think it was frustrating for the team, et cetera, but they handled it well. And like I said, now they're all moving forward. So I get to be, one of the great things is, if that transaction had gone through, I wouldn't have been an investor in Figma anymore. And I get to be an investor a while longer, which is great.
Yeah, totally. And I believe most of your investments that you've done came to you via referrals. Is that correct? From your network?
I think a majority are. And I still think that that's the highest quality source. And there's a lot of reasons
Right.
for this. I mean, this is some of what, even before I was an angel investor that I believe strongly at LinkedIn. I had same advice for hiring and joining companies, et cetera. There's a balance. Referrals always tend to be a great source of talent within a company. And I think as an investor, referrals come in with a purpose, right? There's a reason that they referred the founder to you. And assuming that, the person referring knows you, there's more likely it'll come together. And actually some of my best referrals in the early days, it was a lot of referrals from people I'd worked with. But in the last 5 to 7 years, I would say most of the referrals come from other investors. Or actually, I've gotten to the point now where a lot of founders refer other founders to me. People don't realize how much founders talk to each other and how much they depend on each other in these networks. And so, some of my best investments now, have come from referrals from other founders, founders like Dylan, et cetera, in the portfolio. And so I think that as an angel investor, you always have to be thinking about that network. Why would you be top of mind for someone to refer a great deal to you? How do you avoid, the adverse selection of, do they refer someone to you because they know you're a way to raise money, or do they refer to you because actually it's a good fit and it's actually a great opportunity? And so I do think you have to think about that. But yeah, I think a lot of angel investors focus on other investors, which is good. But long term, I think the most reliable source of referrals are actually the founders you work with. Are you a good investor? Are you a value to have to the company and on the cap table? And the founders know, right? And you control that in terms of how much time and effort you put into it.
Totally. That's a very valid point there. And now let's talk about what do you really look for once a deal comes to you? How do you evaluate a deal and then make investment decision?
Well, that's a good question. I think the higher level question there that I think is important for every angel investor to answer is, what's your model? Right? Venture firms have a model, right? There are early stage firms, there's late stage firms, there's firms that invest at all stages. They have a size of their fund, how much they invest in each company, how many companies they'll put in a fund. And I think one of the problems a lot of angel investors get into is that they go into it without a model. They're just making one-off transactional decisions. And you can get into a lot of trouble that way, both financially and in terms of your long-term returns and results. So I think everyone needs a model. For me, angel investing has value in two ways, right? One, it's very valuable to me financially, of course. A good angel portfolio, if you get access to the better companies, you do have an opportunity to have great returns. But that isn't the primary reason that I invest. A lot of the reasons I angel invest is I feel it helps keep me sharper as an operator to constantly be exposed to other founders and other operators who are building different businesses, different products, and learning from them what works and what doesn't work. In terms of keeping in touch with the market, I mean, this is one of the things I love about Silicon Valley in general, is that the best founders, the best operators, this is Andy Grove, only the paranoid survive. You're always worried about what the next startup would do if it started today, right? I was always worried about this at LinkedIn, always worried about it at Wealthfront, worry about it at Daffy. What would the new startup do? Class of 2024, right. What are they going to do? And so I think being an angel investor gives you access to that. So for me, my model is very simple. I tend to do better. I largely invest at seed stage, right? There's been a little bit, they've built a team, they've actually shipped a product, right? There's some data out there. I'm not as focused on revenue, but I do care about the model. But when I look at, like a lot of folks, I tend to look at the team, right? I look at the founder and what they're doing. It has to be an authentic fit. I'm a big believer in founder product fit, right? It has to be authentic that the founder is the right person to build this, because building a company takes a long time, right? And so if a founder comes to you and says, hey, I've basically found a way to make money, that's great. And I know a lot of people are successful investing that way, but it's hard for me to get behind a company that way and be successful. So I look for founder product fit. I definitely look for go-to-market. I need to understand how the whole business is going to work at scale. They don't have to build it all out, but I have to be able to see that it could be a venture class business. And then lastly, I have to look at where the value comes from the product in the whole ecosystem, right? There are some businesses, some products, and this happens in the consumer market all the time, but also in the enterprise, where you can sell it, but it actually isn't creating value. Maybe it's just moving value around. Maybe it's actually net negative, right? There are some financial products out. This happens in fintech a lot. There are some financial products out there, that might actually be net negative for the people who use them. And for me, that's not sustainable, right? I have to believe that there's a large sustainable business possible. But Once all those three things in, I tend to lean in, and my financial models, I tend to write checks in an amount where I can invest in 4 to 6 companies a year. That's my model. And actually, in my budget, like personally, I have allocated, right? I have enough capital set aside so that I could do that over a decade, because I assume that it takes a decade for the successful companies or more to have any sort of liquidity. And so I think there's some math there on the personal finance front that a lot of people don't do. But anyway, that's my model. I don't think it's the only model to be an angel investor, but for the fact that I'm full time, right, building companies and products, it works for me. And the people, the relationships, and the knowledge I've gained through my angel investing, really to me is irreplaceable. I can't imagine being where I am without it.
Yes, absolutely. Totally agree on all fronts there. And now let's move over to the other side of things of being a founder. You're now a founder of Daffy. So what are you building there, and why are you building it, and why now?
A lot of good questions. And yeah, Daffy was founded during the pandemic, so the question of why now is really quite a good one. But I think that one's the easiest one, which is, I left Dropbox with the intention of starting a company, taking some time off and starting it. I was excited to do something. There was a little bit of, if not now, when. And I felt like I was at the place in my career where I was excited about ideas where I said, there are some great ideas yet to happen in fintech. I was thinking a lot about what the next generation of fintech would work. And so I was looking for an idea that would be unique to me and authentic, and yet hadn't been done, or not done the way that I thought it needed to be done. And so I went through a lot of different ideas. I think I had a Google Doc that may have had over 80. I think 82 might have been the limit. They were not all good ideas, as it turns out. But one of the lists of the ideas on there were great financial products that hadn't been reinvented yet. And I'd had this list even back when I was at Wealthfront. It was how we drive innovation. Like everything's going to get reinvented and made better by being brought online. And the donor advised fund was on there. And so I had been thinking about it for a while. Um, but it finally hit me, I think during the pandemic, everyone was looking for ways to help, caring a lot about the community, different people displaced, careers, jobs, income, all these different things. And suddenly I realized that maybe the problem with donor advised funds had been that it was mostly an attach rate product for the wealthy. And what if we just said, what if we built a product that was for the 60 million or so households in the US who give to charity every year? But we used a donor advised fund as the back end, right? As the account type. And that's really where Daffy came from. And then once you start down this path, you start investigating things and you discover more and more great things. I mean, for me, I was talking to Alejandro Crosa, who's my co-founder. He was one of my favorite engineers to work with at LinkedIn. We'd kept in touch for more than a decade. He had even done some work for Donors Choose back in the day, had a passion for this. And when he got excited about the idea and we decided to do it together, that's really when the company started. But like an investor, I ask some of the same questions as a founder that I ask as an investor, right? Is this a venture class opportunity? Can we get something to scale? What's the go to market? And authentically, is this something that's right for me to do at this stage in my career? And with Daffy, I feel really strongly that it is. I think there are a lot easier products and platforms to build than a platform that helps people put money aside for charity. But I really felt like if I didn't take a crack at this, it might not happen. I know there's a lot of ego and hubris in that, but founders have a little bit of that. So do investors. That's fine. But for me, I got really excited about maybe now is the time. In the pandemic, et cetera, that this was the right moment where people would accept, this idea of putting some money aside for those less fortunate than themselves. And it's been very rewarding. I mean, we raised some funding, we built the team. We raised the Series A in the beginning of 2022. But it's been very exciting. We had a big 2023. And so, hope springs eternal that actually, if we keep executing, keep innovating here, that we might actually build a platform where millions of people who care about giving can connect with each other and with the millions of great organizations and causes out there.
Doing great work there, and you've worked at some world class companies that build world class products, right? So in somewhat way what's the recipe or what are the traits of a world class product, right? So how are you trying to apply that knowledge at Daffy, and how do you identify a world class product? What are the specific traits that are there in that?
Well, I mean, I think, the biggest lesson to me about building world-class products, et cetera, is it's really about a combination of the team, the people building it, and their intentionality. What are they trying to do? What goals have they set? I've written these posts over the years about how to do product leadership, et cetera. And one of the most popular ones was the simplicity of product strategy, right? And there's all these frameworks out there for product strategy. I don't want to get in the way. There's all these different ones, but at a high level, if you really want to make it simple, what game are you playing, and how do you keep score, right? And so I think startups, even the definition of a world-class product means very different things. I mean, if you're talking about the next iPhone, that's a very different thing than a startup that's building an MVP to try and figure out if there is a product there. What are the features that are useful to people, right? This balance between kind of the polish and intentionality of the features versus kind of the experimental nature of hypothesis testing and figure out what works. You have a theory. Founders have a theory. I think there's a product with great value, but until you have real users using the product and telling you what they think, you don't really know, where those hits are. And so I think a lot of what I've brought to Daffy is just actually some of the angel investing is valuable, right? When you see a lot of founders go through this, great founders who build it, you realize that great startups are about phasing, right? There's almost an innumerable number of problems you have to solve. You can't possibly solve them at once. But that's why venture investing tends to be phased, right? What are the most things we have to prove this cycle? What risks are we trying to take off the table? And so in building Daffy, like, orienting the team around, building a great product, okay, step one, we have a core idea. What's the simplest version of this product that we can get out there to test the theory of whether it creates value, right? And that's a lot of what we did in our, initial launch. Then the first year is this valuable? Do people like it? Do they recommend it? Do they love it? Do they churn? All these metrics, all these things you look at, you want to make sure that you have a great product. And then once you have the great product, you start thinking like, well, it seems like we have a great product, but no one knows about it, right? How do you distribute it? How do you get it out there, right? And the best distribution strategies are always built into the product themselves. And so I think we went through that journey together. It's still early. We're still very, very early at Daffy, although we had a huge 2023, so it's very exciting. I think a lot of the product journey and the company journey aren't that different in the early phases, at least to me. A lot of the startup journey, a lot of the product journey, you want to build a world-class product. The secret actually is you have to build a world-class company around it. I mean, this is my career journey. I mean, I was like every engineer, I loved optimizing things, right? Getting that algorithm to run in the right algorithmic time, having that operation happen in 30 milliseconds, it's amazing when you get that to work. But then I ended up going down the design path because if you get the thing to run in 30 milliseconds, but it takes the human using it 20 minutes to figure out what to do, like what did you optimize for, right? You didn't optimize the big part of the problem. And so you start going down that design path. And how do you build a great product, really understand the user's needs, all the different elements that go into design-centric thinking. And yes, then you build a great product. But if you don't build a great company, you'll build a great product. You'll get to build the 1.0, the 1.1. Maybe you'll even get to a 1.5, but you'll never get to build the 2.0. You won't build the 3.0. And I think a lot of great products, we don't remember them kind of correctly, that a lot of great products, it's not the first version that was perfect or the best, right? Like there's this iteration to it. And so to me, it's all part of the same process, building that team, building the company that can economically support the product, building that great product, thinking through distribution, and then all the details of actually how you build it, architecture scale. Like to me, that's the problem that I love. I mean, that's the unifying factor for me. Everything, all the way from engineering, all the way through to kind of company building and everything in between.
Absolutely. And a lot of the products that you worked at also had virality baked into them, right? And whether we talk about LinkedIn, Dropbox, link sharing, and all is happening there, right? So, how are you trying to add that virality element to Daffy? And also tell us how other founders can add virality to their products as well.
Well, I think that's a great question. I think that it even goes beyond virality. I think this gets down to really thinking about distribution and how there's a whole world out there of people who, if you've done your homework, you've built something great, you've built a great product for them, but they don't know you exist, right? And I've talked about this in the past, and I've written about it. I think that a lot of great engineers, great designers, great product managers spend a lot of time thinking about the users of their product, but they don't spend a lot of time thinking about the people who are not using their product. And I know that sounds counterintuitive because, products are designed with intentionality. They're not for everyone, right? You design for everyone, you design for no one. But still, usually for most startups, there's a huge number of people out there who should be using your product. You designed it for them, they just don't know about it. But if you want to design virality or, product-led growth or all these other, terms that get floated around the industry, if you want to do it, the mistake I see a lot of people do is they think that virality is just, a referral program. Oh, I get it, right? Like, if you invite someone, they'll join. And sure, referral programs are valuable. I mean, referral programs are very useful at Wealthfront. We grew Wealthfront quite a bit. I think at one point, about a third of our new clients at Wealthfront were coming from referral. And so there is something to be said that if you build a product that people don't just use, but that they really love, you can build a referral system that works. But to me, that's not true virality. To me, true virality comes when authentically the product is better when more people use it. And I think that's the hard question that a lot of founders and product leaders avoid asking themselves. How is this product better when more people use it? I mean, they're so focused on it being better for them, right? They get more users, they have more growth, ideally more revenue, et cetera, that they don't ask the actual fundamental question from the user. How does it get better, right? And this is a big problem. For example, in fintech, most products are inherently not viral because the products are not multiplayer. They are single player games, so to speak, right? Your bank account isn't multiplayer fundamentally. Your retirement account. I love, by the way, I love personal finance. I love all the problems tied to it. I have a high degree of empathy for people who care about these products and services, and I love building them and designing them. But I mean, it's not a multiplayer system. And so actually, I think that can lead in direction. So for Daffy, one of the great things I loved about Daffy from the get-go is that authentically giving is actually something that people do with other people, right? A lot of financial tasks you don't do with other people, but people care. They care about the organizations. They connect with the people there. They volunteer. They share it with their families. They talk about it. Siblings talk about it. People talk about their parents. They talk about their grandchildren, the causes, the organizations, the volunteer work, the organizations they support. And so as much as possible, we look for those insights to design them into Daffy and that experience. And actually, it's been a real source of innovation for us because the traditional donor advised funds, right, the Fidelities, the Schwabs, the Vanguards, they don't do this, right? So when we roll out a family plan, right, it's based on the insight that we had a lot of saying, oh, actually, I would love to put some money away. My brother and I are thinking about starting a fund to give to charities together. I want to, my children are grown. I want to include them in our giving, grandchildren, nieces, nephews. People want to involve their parents, et cetera. And so I think you design these things into the product. But, for Daffy, I think the big thing, the big bet we're making is that actually people at some level care enough about the organizations they support that they actually want to share this information and other people want to learn from them. I mean, we don't know how our friends give. We actually don't know our neighbors, our colleagues. It's amazing how many people don't even know, like they want to volunteer at a food bank. They don't even know where the local food banks are. They don't even realize that they have friends and colleagues who already do this. And so part of what's underlying Daffy is some of the same insight we had at LinkedIn back in the early days. Back then, people just assumed that career information was something you only shared when you were looking for a job. And most people are only looking for a job every 2 to 3 years, so it's not that often. But at LinkedIn, we said, no, actually, there's a lot of value in having your reputation out there, your identity, professional identity out there. We think there's a lot of value in people's giving, that actually people are proud in many cases of the organization. Not always. Some people give anonymously, and that's great. But we think that a lot of people both want to learn about organizations from each other and are willing to share. So, probably one of the most, these small touches actually make a big difference. And they lead people to refer to others. We just rolled out a new feature at Daffy called campaigns. So now if you have an account at Daffy, internet campaigns have been around for decades, for a long time. But now, because you have money put aside for charity, we let anyone with a donor advised fund actually do a matching campaign. You can match dollar for dollar for any organization you support. So instead of giving money to your kid's school, maybe they're raising money for a new maker lab, 3D printers and the like. Maybe they're raising money for sports equipment or musical instruments. The fact that you are now empowered to say, instead of donating to that, I'm actually going to run a matching campaign and bring other people in, is an authentically great way to fulfill our mission, which is to help people be more generous more often, but involves other people, right? Inherently, everyone who sees one of those campaigns now learns about Daffy, and maybe they're a good fit. And so I think that if you want to have viral systems, if you want conversion, there's the mechanics, of course. I've written about these. You have to think about branching factor. You have to think about cycle time. There's all this math you have to do. But in the end, the product design, it has to be authentically a product that gets better the more people who use it.
Absolutely. And I think there's a VC firm called NFX, and they talk about this phenomena a lot. They call it network effects, and they have made several videos explaining this phenomena where the more people use it, the product gets better, right? So it's an amazing phenomena, and once you get to learn it, it actually opens some corners in your brain on how some of the best products actually are using this phenomena to bake in virality and also make those companies successful and also defensible over time. A new company cannot come in and compete because such strong network effects are in place already that it's hard to beat them, right?
I think just to be careful there, I will say I love NFX and James and that whole team. And they've done a phenomenal job, I think, taking a lot of the information and knowledge that people who've worked on these products and features historically and have learned the hard way how they work and how to build them. They've done
Right.
such a good job putting content out there. I really think it's valuable for the ecosystem.
Right.
The only caveat I'll give, and I'm sure actually even they would agree,
Right.
no moat is insurmountable, right? This industry is brutal. One of the great things about this industry is that technology keeps changing, and a very, very smart person looking at the same problem today might come up with a very different and better solution than an equivalent very smart person just 5 years ago. And it's part of the energy. And also the market changes, right? The early adopters, the early majority, the late majority, the sensibility of what makes sense to them changes. And so there is no moat, I think, that's inspiring. Even network effects. Everyone loves to talk about network effects, and they are very stable and durable. But I think it's a mistake to believe that you can ever rest on your laurels. These companies, these platforms, they have to constantly earn their business. And I think the best organizations and companies don't forget that.
Yeah, to totally agree on that. Adam, customer delight is something that investors always advise their founders to build into their products. That is your customer really delighted? And we see different companies doing it in different ways, right? So, what approach do you suggest to founders, and how should they be thinking about it?
Well, I think we're all influenced by our experience and kind of what we've done in the past. And, my first job out of school as an engineer was at Apple. So I have a very Apple sensibility about these things. I personally, I think people throw around the word delight a lot without really having a crisp definition of what they're talking about, right? And I think it loses its meaning if you're just talking about people enjoying a product or having a product that just works. Uh, Simplicity, delight get conflated to each other. So the definition I use, I think actually I heard this first. Tim Cook was doing an interview with Kara Swisher at a conference a while ago. I think it was Code. And, she was needling him at the time, asking about like all these new things unannounced. And Tim, of course, I think it was the car maybe, or the TV or something like that. And Tim gave the classic answer, which Apple answered, which is like, we don't talk about unannounced products, about, future products. And, Kara said, why? Like, I have to ask, like, you have fans, like, they want to know where you're going. Like in Hollywood, they put out the movies ahead of time. Like, why don't you just give them something? And I felt like Tim gave like the Apple answer, which is very much, at Apple, we believe that our customers value surprise. And I think there's something very insightful there, that delight is tied to surprise. It's very different than a metrics mover, something you've analyzed the metrics, how to move the business forward. That's for you and the company more than anything. Customer requests come in, people request things, but there's no surprise there. When people are requesting things, it's that obvious. I think delight comes from rewarding that customer's faith in you, that there is a team out there of technologists, designers, people who are coming up with innovative ideas, things that you wouldn't have thought of. But once you see it, you're like, that's genius. And you want to talk, you want to show it to other people, right? And it can be a small touch. Delight can come from the right sound or the right interaction. I mean, I always talk about in the early days for mobile apps, like Angry Birds didn't spread because it was viral. It was just the touchscreen was new and that feeling of pulling it back and the sound and the silliness, there was a little bit of magic there. And if you saw someone playing it, you're like, what's that? And if you did it, you wanted to show someone, like there's a lot to that. And so I think that the hard part about Delight is that it's very hard to operationalize. Like you can't just be creative on a moment's notice. And so I find that the best people are very attentive, that when they see those sparks, they don't ignore them. They write them down. And they have a list in their head of things that they could do that just be fun and great in the product. And then the hard part as a founder, as a team, is just to make time periodically to scratch that itch. If you do weekly sprints, that's 13 sprints in a quarter. You can afford one or two to kind of just doing features that make it great, that you think spark that delight. And the reality is, I think if you build products and services that delight your customers, if you even do that once or twice a year, you'll find that over time, your customer base doesn't just use your product. They don't just like your product. They'll love it irrationally. And one thing I'll tell you is one thing competitors hate is they hate competing with a product and service where the customers love it irrationally. I mean, this is why people hate competing with Apple at times, because they say, wait, I have another product that is faster, quicker, better, lower price. And people hate, they're like, why are people choosing the Apple product? It's because the Apple product is more than just the product itself. It's people feeling like that when they go with that product, they will get that feeling that they will get some of that magic, even though Apple doesn't deliver it all the time. They don't. But if you have a pattern of doing it, I think that's really the way to build, in a way, another type of moat around your product and business. And so I encourage all founders and product leaders to think about delight on a regular basis.
Absolutely. There's a wealth of wisdom in that answer there for founders. You mentioned how it's important while building a world class product, you also have to build a world class company around it, right? And a big part of that is surrounding yourself with world class people, right? So, how do you attract the best quality of people to come and work with you?
Well, I think, as much as I love it, I do believe that the quality of the people you have, the talent, the capability is important. But I don't think there's a universal definition of that, right? Different companies, different products, different markets, different strategies reward different skill sets, different levels of experience, different people. And I mean, I was always fascinated when I was a kid, I'd watch the Olympics, et cetera. It was always fascinating to me that sometimes the all-star team doesn't win, right? Sometimes it's actually the team that's been playing together, working together, trusts each other, that actually coordinates better and beats the team that nominally has the best player of each position. And so I think about that a lot. And so I think a lot of what you're building is building the right team, right, in the right environment for them to execute. And part of being the right team is that they have to authentically believe that this is the right thing for them to be doing in their career, right? And people join companies for lots of different reasons. I mean, this is one of the reasons I love being at LinkedIn. The talent market, the labor market, is something I've always been fascinated with. And so I think you have to have everything from mission alignment to a certain culture of how you work together. And I think there's a lot of judgment that founders put into, either intuitively or intentionally, into the way they build teams. And for me, I've always been a believer that software is a team sport. And what I mean by that is that there's a lot of different skills that come together and people with different backgrounds, right? Design, engineering, product, marketing, sales, finance, etc. And I spent a lot of time trying to think about how do you create environments where each of those people can bring the skills they have to bear and yet work together well. I mean, and for better or for worse, Alejandro and I, at Daffy, do our best to build the culture that we think builds the best software, small, empowered. I'm actually public about this idea that I think that if you want to have people be empowered to do their great work and come up with ideas that you wouldn't come up with and execute on things that you couldn't do yourself, a lot of the best work you can do is actually sharing the frameworks about how you make decisions and sharing the data about the business and the product. Because if you have a lot of smart people and they have the same frameworks and they have the same data, then all of a sudden you get a lot of alignment. People don't have to look over their shoulder. They naturally collaborate better. And when there are disagreements, those are actually the disagreements you want to pay attention to. Because if smart people are looking at the same framework and the same data and coming to a different decision, well, maybe there are multiple solutions to that problem. And that's a really great choice to have is, which one do you want to go down? Which one do you think is the most valuable for your company and your product, your members at that time? And so, anyway, that's how I tend to think about things. But like I said, like I see founder, this is why I love being an angel investor, right? Like that fit of the founder and the company. There are some markets where you're just moving fast, right? It's a little bit of a land grab. You've got to get out there. You're building a network effect, distribution, right? It accrues to the winner. There are other products that take a long time to build, right? Maybe you're a little early. I think look how big Roblox is now. Do you know how long Roblox took to build? How long that team had to believe that eventually, children would want to spend that much time in a virtual world and actually could build a space where people could build on top of it, etc. Really long-term vision. And so I think you just have to build the right team, the right culture for the strategy, for the company you're trying to build. I saw this at LinkedIn, of course, right? LinkedIn was not an explosive growth. It was not photo sharing. It was not dating. But it was we believed, a really valuable platform at scale. And so we methodically worked. I mean, don't get me wrong, we pushed to grow as fast as we could. But some things take a little bit more time and more intentionality. And there's a balancing act between the learning and building that quality product versus growth, right? You push growth too hard. Sometimes it's all you can do to keep up with that growth. And we've even seen products and companies, falter and fail a bit when they run into growth that's unexpected, right? It's a really hard problem. Teams deal with it. It's a good problem to have in some ways, but it's stressful.
Yep, totally. And you're building an early stage startup yourself and have invested in multiple early stage startups and have seen them grow from there, right? Have seen their journeys. What are the metrics do you think that are the most crucial that early stage startup should be tracking? And also tell us what are the key metrics that you are tracking yourself at Daffy?
Yeah, well, I think that comes down to the strategy. Like I said, I don't think there's one universal metric. There's some universality to the types of metrics people track, right? There's economic metrics around revenue and profitability and margins. There's engagement metrics, right, around how often people use your product, right, and how deeply they use it, right, kind of engagement. And there's just growth. How many people are joining your service, using your product every day? And I think there's a lot of good metrics out there. I think a lot of smart people spend time on that. Actually, I think one of the mistakes teams make is they always think that they're a unique snowflake, that their product and platform is different. They spend a lot of time arguing about what exactly the perfect metric is. I remember like 10 years ago when everyone's doing social networking, et cetera, everyone's arguing about the right engagement metrics. And actually, I think to some extent, saying like, well, if you look at how many people use this product daily as a ratio to how many people use it monthly, that's a pretty good proxy. Is that metric perfect? No. Is that good enough for you to actually find signal and kind of build out in the early days? Of course it is. So I think it does depend on the strategy. In fintech, and Daffy, I do think of it as a fintech company at its heart. I think the economics matter. I think companies make a mistake not looking at things, everything from, acquisition costs to their unit margins, right? I think a big mistake fintech founders make is they move over a lot of software metrics into a financial service. And they don't all apply because software businesses traditionally are very high margin at scale, right? You might have a fixed cost to build the team, to build the product and operate it, but that incremental user, right, doesn't cost very much to support. And that's not true with all financial products. It's true with some, but not with all. And so I do think you have to look at your economic products. I care about that. I cared about that a lot at Wealthfront. I care about a lot of that at Daffy. I want to because to me, that's about building something that will scale. I think growth, of course, matters, and looking at acquisition and that entire funnel matters a lot. What are your traffic channels? What are your conversion rates? The basic blocking and tackling of the internet in some ways hasn't changed, right? Every day, a certain number of people get exposed to your content, your product, and your service and make a decision whether to take the leap and try you. And you have control over that. Everything from your messaging to your design and that experience. And then, of course, engagement, your core product. What is your product's purpose? Does it fulfill it? This is why people look at churn rates. This is why people look at referrals, et cetera. They're looking for this signal of how much people really need and love the product. But this is one of the things I love. As you mentioned before, I've actually worked on a number of businesses. eBay, I think, burned me out a little bit on transaction-oriented businesses. Like, it's very hard, every day to build a business where you're winning that business a transaction at a time. Even for a marketplace, it's hard at scale. And so, starting with LinkedIn, I really fell in love with kind of subscription businesses, membership businesses. I love, from a product perspective, this idea that every day, every month, your team has to wake up and say, like, what are we doing this month to earn that business? To make the product better, to make the experience better. And so, subscription businesses are pretty methodical, right? You're looking at acquisition, right? You're looking at your revenue per user, right, on an ongoing basis, and you're looking at churn rates, right? How many people decide to not use your product anymore? And so for me, I spent a lot of time looking at that. I mean, Daffy, one of the great things about Daffy that we saw early with donor advised funds and with charity is actually when people take the leap to put money aside for charity, they tend to do it on an ongoing basis, right? The churn rates are very low, right? People don't just frivolously make this commitment to put money aside for charity. And so the good news is we don't convince people to give money to charity. Typically, people come to Daffy because they already believe that giving is a good thing, right? That they should be putting money aside for charity. And so it looks like to us that we built a product that actually rewards people for that and makes that easier for them. And so we track all these different metrics. We want to know how often people contribute to their funds. We want to know how often people donate. We want to see those donations increase over time. I mean, we have a mission here, is to help people be more generous more often. And so we track specific metrics tied to that. But at a high level, for most startups, yeah, growth, engagement, revenue, you need to know how your platform works.
Absolutely. And would you like to share some key learnings that you maybe got from working at all these successful organizations and now creating these organizations yourself? What are some learnings that you would like to share with other founders who are starting out in their startup journey?
Well, I mean, I think that's a great question. I mean, initially when you asked this question, like, what did you learn from all these great companies? The number one thing you learn from working at great successful companies is actually how many things they do wrong and they're still successful, right? That actually is, everyone talks about learning from failure. And there is value. You can learn from failure, but actually failure is very difficult, especially when it comes to companies and products, because everyone argues causality. No one actually knows, like, you did 100 things wrong. Which one was the one that made it not work? Smart people can disagree about that indefinitely. When a company works in a platform, you at least know the things that look like they drove a lot of the success. And you see all these mistakes that you make along the way. And it really makes you very durable to this idea that no, not everything is done correctly. You don't know everything. It's a learning process and you're just working the problem. And so I think a lot of what you get at these big companies is seeing all the issues, the panics, the problems, and watching smart people dig in, brainstorm, and then solve them. Sometimes in the obvious way, and sometimes in surprising ways. It gives you the fortitude, I think, as a founder, to dive in and admit that you don't know everything. You don't know all the facts. And so the biggest thing of the founder, I think, is people talk about the founder journey. They talk about the investing journey, angel, et cetera. That growth mindset, always learning. And then just brutal prioritization of, like, what's the next problem you want to take off the table? What is your biggest concern? What your hypothesis in the end as a founder is that there's a great company to be built here. It's not even specific to the product. I mean, you may have a passion for a specific problem, a specific product, but if you're going to start a company, then you have to believe that there's a great company can be built. And actually, you'll notice this with great investors, et cetera. No matter the platitudes they give internally, right? Those investment memos, when great investors write up why they believe in the company, the team, you'll see they talk about the founder, they talk about the team, they talk about the market, they talk about the product. And so I think it's very easy as a founder to forget that your job isn't to pitch this thing. It isn't to sell it. It's actually to make it real. right? And so, going in with that learning mindset is probably the best advice I would give. And just remember, like I said, like every one of the companies that you respect, every one of the founders, every CEO that you think is amazing, every billionaire who you think you want to emulate, there were dozens and dozens of problems they ran into where they didn't actually have the answer. But they had the fortitude to push, and they were open enough in terms of both people looking at other products, companies, history, whatever gave them that insight to try enough things, with purpose, that they were able to navigate those challenges.
Absolutely. Those are some really valuable learnings to take away for all founders building out there, that you don't need to know it all. It's fine. And even the best didn't know it all, as we are getting firsthand from Adam, who has been there with them. Thanks so much for being on the podcast, Adam, and sharing all these learnings on the investing front, angel investing front, and also on how to build businesses, having seen all these great companies get built firsthand. To end this with, can you tell us where can our listeners go and follow your journey and also learn more about what you're building at Daffy?
Yeah, so I try to be very public and I write. So of course you can follow me on social media, LinkedIn, X, etc. I'm fairly active. It's easy to find Adam Nash, as it turns out. But of course, if you want to learn more about Daffy, you can go to daffy.org. Very easy to sign up and try it. I'm always looking for people to tell me what we're doing right and what we're doing wrong, and so play with the product. And then also, of course, if you're interested in some of the personal finance content, et cetera, I put out, I actually do make my Stanford class slides public. So if you go to cs007.blog, you can find lessons about personal finance there, including slides on venture capital and private equity and investing in general. So, but yeah, the easiest way to follow me is just to follow me on social media. You'll get pointers everywhere.
Thanks so much. I'll make sure to put all those links in the show notes below. Thanks so much for doing this with us, Adam. And I wish you all the best for your journey ahead.
Yeah, thank you.
Pleasure.